Now we have to begin to understand, as soon as as soon as Aaron reached out his arm over the river and the river became blood, then the Bible says that the Pharaoh sent his magicians and his people to pull upon sacred arts, dark magic, y'all, to now do the same thing. This is called witchcraft. Witchcraft refers to the practice of divination, sorcery, or consulting with spirits, particularly evil spirits. It encompasses any attempt to gain knowledge or power through supernatural means other than God's direct revelation or power. And so Aaron and Moses, right, are using God's direct revelation or power, but the Pharaoh is sending his people to do it another way. Why? Because God's the creator, Satan is the imitator. Y'all remember the song? God the creator, the Satan the imitator. God the creator, Satan the imitator. Then the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your rod over the streams, over the rivers, and over the ponds, and cause frogs to come up on the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. And the magicians did so with their enhancements. That's that black magic stuff, y'all. And brought up frogs on the land of Egypt. So they were able to bring up frogs. Then the Pharaoh called, so let's just stop right there. So Aaron is God's prophet, okay? And so in following God's directions, now all of these frogs began to come up, right? Come up out of the land. So much so that the second judgment impacts their personal life. So the first part, right? Plague number one, God breaks off a natural resource to the land. Plague number two, now God is almost irritating, right? You see frogs everywhere, ribbit, 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 ribbit. Second plague becomes more invasive to their everyday living. Right? First plague, all right, I just won't eat water. But that second plague, right? When God issued out the amphibians, right? The second plague then begins to get into their day-to-day lives. They get a little irritated. They can still keep working, but it gets a little irritated. Not only that, both of these plagues were replicated by witchcraft. Remember, the great solution has to become impossible. It won't seem impossible if you had that solution at the beginning. Y'all hear? So, what we see is the making and the work of a great storyline or a great testimony. Why? Because you overcome the adversary by the blood of the Lamb, that's Jesus, and the power of our testimony. And in order to have a good testimony or a good story, the solution must seem impossible. So, in order for the solution to seem impossible, that means that the judgments, the signs and wonders that are multiplied, have to go from possible to impossible. Y'all hear? This means that your situation, the doctor's notes, the diagnosis has to go from something no ordinary to something rare. That's why they can't figure out what's wrong with you. Because God says, I'm creating a good story. Because this is how you overcome the adversary. Okay, not that. Just a few months ago, right? I remember when my bank account had literally zero, was negative. And literally, in literally 1 week of me just saying, okay, God, you got it. Because that's where I just live. I done learned how to just live off faith. God went from that to me being a blessing to others. Y'all have to understand, He made it seem impossible. This is why Paul says, look, rejoice in trials and tribulations. Because at the end, you're going to not want for anything. Y'all, these Israelites have been enslaved for over 430 years. Another week or so of watching God do a miracle was not going to hurt them. God says, I want your story to be so profound that when I bring you out of this season, you won't have a choice but to begin and run and tell everybody. Do y'all want to know how the gospel spread so quickly? Do y'all remember in the days of Jesus, there were no phones? There was no technology. They couldn't, hey man, I just met this dude, man. His name is the Messiah. They didn't have that, y'all. That is not how the gospel was getting spread. In fact, this is why Jesus kept saying, look, to some people he would say, don't tell anybody. And they couldn't hold it in. When the blind man began to see, he literally said, don't tell anybody. The blind man went and told everybody. Why? Because he knew that the solution was so impossible. There's something about an impossible story, right? That we can't hold to ourselves. We have to tell everybody. We want to know how to go and spread the gospel. God says, I just want you to go and spread your testimony. And in order for you to go and spread your testimony, come on now, God says, I have to make your solution. I have to make who you are on the other side seem impossible. You want to know how you went from the jail cell, come on now, on drugs, come on now, on the pole, come on now, to the pulpit. God says, I needed the story to seem impossible. This is why you ought not be ashamed of where you used to be. Because where I used to be isn't who I am now. God is making me someone that would seem impossible. Y'all may not know a little bit about my story, but I was raised by a single mama with a father that was addicted to crack. And so when people began to see the goodness of God on my life, it was God creating something impossible. Are y'all here? And so in order for the breaking to seem impossible, it has to seem possible at the beginning. Because the only way that the Pharaoh would know that it is impossible is to begin to try the things that God was doing. There's something that is not stated. And if you're just reading to read, you will miss what God is just saying. This is why I love to go deeper into the word, right? So the sentence above that, right? Verse number 7, Pharaoh has his magicians do what they just did, and the frogs come out the land of Egypt. But the very next verse, he's now calling upon the Lord to have the frogs go away. What is the text not saying? What the text did not mention is that in order for the Pharaoh to now go call upon the Lord that he don't believe in, that means that his people could get the frogs to show up, but they clearly couldn't get the frogs to leave. That they had enough power in their witchcraft and black magic to get the frogs to appear on the scene. Woo! But they did not have enough power. They did not have enough revelation to make the frogs go away. And so automatically what seemed possible at the beginning is already slowly seeming impossible now. Are y'all here? So this is the first time we see the Pharaoh going back to Moses and Aaron and saying, can you get to the Lord to clean this up?